Thank you. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. We are still in the topic of compound interest. And my previous recording, I dealt with the introduction, the basics in terms of the theory, and I went through the meaning of M. What does it mean to be compounded, monthly, half yearly, annual? But I've not dealt in details of the different compounding periods per annum or different yearly compounds. And we mentioned that M is the frequency indicating how often do we earn interest and add back to the capital or increase the amount that we have originally invested. We did example 3.1 previously, and we calculated 3.1 using general workings without the use of the calculator. Then after we again answered 3.1 with the use of the formula. And if you remember, with the use of the formula, we said sum accumulated equals A. But what I did not highlight in the previous calculation of the interest or the future value concerning the formula is the fact that we can use this formula to calculate different unknowns. In the previous one, we needed to calculate sum accumulated, which was the subject of the formula. And we said that sum accumulated indicated by S is the future value. And we said present value, which is A, is the present value, which is the principal amount. And we said I, it is the interest as a percentage. And M, we know that M is the frequency or compounding period a year, or frequency of yearly compound. So we highlighted the frequency of yearly compounds. Then we said M is time in years. Then what I want to highlight is the fact that if you do have the future value and you have all other variables available, you can be required to calculate the present value just using the formula without using the functions of the calculator. Now my focus now is to introduce you to the best functions that we have, which we will be using them very regularly in our calculator. Now, meaning I will be responding to the same 3.1, but now using the functions of the calculator. And the calculator that I will be using, which is highly recommended, it is the sharp calculator because it is really sharp in terms of calculations. And the minute you use the sharp calculator, you always become a sharp student and you get the sharp answers. Now, in your sharp calculator there on top, there are functions. And the first function or button, it says PV. And we know that the present value is the principal amount. It is the principal amount that we have invested. Meaning in this case, the 180 Rand will be indicated as the present value. And remember, principal amount is the original amount. So this is the original amount. Another function that is there in your calculator, it is I divided by Y. And this is the interest percentage. This is the interest percentage, which is in this case, our I will be that one I over Y, it will be that 6.5% in the scenario of this exercise. And I want to highlight that the interest must be divided by M. And why am I saying interest is divided by M? It comes from the formula that we dealt with previously. When we dealt with the formula or did the calculations in the formula. If you look there, I is divided by M, and this is very important because when we work with a compounding period or the frequency being more than once a year, we need to make sure that we divide with the right number. So now if you look in the formula, we said interest divided by M, which is the compounding or the number of compounds in a year. So now we'll be doing that also when we use the functions of the calculator, meaning how many times is the interest compounded. If it's compounded every month, that means we will be compounding interest 12 times a year. So this will be divided by 12 in the case where we are compounding 12 times a year. If the interest is compounded every 6 months, that means we'll be compounding or earning interest twice a year, meaning 6 months and 6 months, and there are 2 6 months in a year. So now meaning this will be 2. If the interest is compounded, let us say quarterly, we know that there are 4 quarters in a year, so now this will be 4. If the interest is compounded every 4 months, there are 3 4 months in a year, which is 4 8 12. So now this will be divided by 3, and I want to highlight this because it is very crucial, and if it's not important. Now we go to another function, which is n. N is time in years, and n is time in years, but I want to say that n is the number of compounds, in a period of the investment. Is the number of compounds in the period of the investment. That means if we are compounding the investment once a year, and the investment is over a period of 3 years, that means our n will be 3. But if it's compounded twice, that means we need to say in a year how many times do we compound? 2 times. That means we say 2 times by 3 when it's compounded 2 times a year or half yearly. That means our n will have to be 6 in this case. Hence I want to say n is the number of compounds. How many times do we compound our interest over the period of the investment? Remember, still n is the number of years. I want to highlight that. But when we work with the functions of the calculator, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Then after another function there in your calculator, it says FV. I don't want to do PMT yet, because when we do annuity, then we'll deal with the PMT, which is the payment. We have another function called future value, and future value is sum accumulated, which is indicated as S, the one that we used in the formula. This is sum accumulated, and we dealt with this when we did our simple interest calculations. Then there's another function that says comp, another button that is written comp, and it's black in terms of the color in my calculator. It is below the X or the mode, or after the future value, to be honest. After the future value, there's a button says comp. Comp means calculate. In other words, compute, calculate. That means if we want to calculate the future value, we need to say comp FV if we are required to calculate the future value. If we want to calculate present value, we need to say comp PV after we have punched all other amounts that we need to punch, or all other figure that we need to punch. Then I will say at the end, after we entered present value, entered interest, entered n, what we will need to calculate the future value. Then after we say comp future value. So if we want to calculate present value, we first have to enter future value and the interest. Then after we say comp future value, which is calculate future value. So now that button comp is only you press it when you're stating that I want to calculate the future value, or I want to calculate interest, or I want to calculate n, which is the period of the investment. So now this is the very important functions that one needs to be very familiar with. And there will definitely be a video that will be specifically on these functions, and more special for those who are using the other calculator except the sharp calculator, which is the HP. But we always highly recommend that students should adopt the sharp calculator. Now, in this case, we then now come to this exercise which we are busy with, example 3.1. 3.1 says compute, which is that button that says comp. Now, compute the interest earned if 180 is invested for 3 years. What do we have? We have an amount of 180. Now, whenever you have the present value, your present value must be recorded as plus or minus. That means you press plus or minus as this is the amount that you invested. So now you first have to say plus minus present value. Now that is exactly what you'll do in the calculator. You first press plus or minus, and that plus and minus is the button there next to 0. or the dot next to 0 at the bottom of your calculator, will say plus minus 180, because this is the amount that we presently have or invested. And we say how much is our interest. Our interest, it is 6.5%. Then we say 6.5 divided by 1. Remember, I said to you in the formula that your interest is divided by the number of the compounds in a year. So now in this case, the interest in this exercise is compounded once a year, so we divide by 1. So this is divided by 1. And this is I divide by y, interest per year. Then we have n, and our n, it is 3 times by 1, which is the number of compounds which is compounded once a year. So now that means our n is 3, then you say n. What do we need to calculate? We need to calculate the future value of this investment. So that you say future value at the end of year 3 minus the amount we invested, the difference will be the interest that has been accumulated. Because compounding is to accumulate interest over, or adding interest to the amount that we initially invested. So now what we need to calculate, and we say comp future value. We need to calculate the future value of this investment at the end of 3 years. So now in your calculator, you do exactly the same thing. You say plus minus. Make sure that you first clear your calculator, because the functions of the financial calculator, they keep information behind the scene. So you need to make sure that you clear all the time. How do you clear your calculator or clear the memory? You say second function alpha 0, 0. You press the second function, which is yellow. You press alpha, which is blue or green. Then you press 0, which is memo. Then you press 0, where it says the clear memory. Then you say 0. Then it clears everything behind the scene that was recorded. Then after we say plus minus 180, not 1800, plus minus 180. Then after we say PV. Then after we say 6.5 divided by 1. Remember, 1 is m being the frequency. How many times the interest compounded in a year? It is once, because it's compounded annually. Then we say 6.5 divided by 1. We press I/y, which is the interest. Then after we say 3 times 1, we press n. In other words, we are saying 3 times 1, which is 3, is our n. Then after we press the button comp, which is compute, C-O-M-P, press comp, then future value. What are we looking for is the future value, which is 217 rand 43 cents. So now we do have the future value very easily from the calculations that we have using the calculator. Then after we say the interest that we have earned over the period of the investment will be equal to the future value minus the present value. Then the future value, we know that the future value, it is an amount of 217 rand 43 cents minus the present value of 180 rand, and this will give us the same amount of the same amount of 37 rand 43 cents. Apologies for that 1.8, but it's just 180. We already got to this amount, and we can see that the functions of the calculator, they make our lives very easy. We don't have to be calculating interest for year 1, for year 2, for year 3, and we add the interest back to the balance at the beginning of the year. We just press everything and we tell the calculator that, calculator, we need to earn interest once a year and over the period of 3 years, and the amount we invested, which is plus minus PV, is 180. So tell us how much will be in the account at the end of 3 years. Then now the calculator will immediately tell us that the amount at the end of 3 years will be 217.43, and the difference between what we invested and the future value will be the interest earned over the period of the investment. So now this is just the beginning of how we use the functions of the calculator. Now we come to example 3.2. It says in 3.2, we have 8,500 which is placed in a savings account. the minute we invest money, we know that amount will be what is called the present value. So we already know that plus minus 8,500 is the amount that we initially invested, which is the principal amount. So 8.5 is the principal value or the principal amount. And they say this amount is placed in a savings account. That means it's invested. For how long? For a period of 3 years. So now that means our N, it is 3 years. Remember, we still need to multiply 3 by the number of compounds over the period of a year, meaning how often is the interest compounded and added back to the investment. And they say the interest is at 5% per annum. So meaning we say 5, then we say that will be I divided by Y, and it's compounded annually. That means we divide or we multiply here by 1, and here we divide by 1. Why? Because it's compounded once a year. Then after, what are we required to calculate? We are told that, and we can see obviously, if there is a present value, we do have N, we do have interest. That means what we are likely to be required to calculate, it is the future value. That is the possible answer that will be required. But let us listen to what is given in the second statement. It says at the end of the time period. Remember, the time period in this case is 3 years because 8.5 is invested for a period of 3 years. So they say at the end of 3 years, the money was withdrawn, or it was withdrawn and invested with the post office at 7% per annum, compounded annually once again for a further 5 years. So now that means this amount of 8.5, which was invested for 3 years at 5% per annum, compounded annually, meaning earning interest once a year and added back to the principal amount, will stay there for 3 years. Then we will draw after 3 years. So we need to know how much will be withdrawn at the end of 3 years, knowing that this amount of money was earning interest at the end of every year, of which the interest is added back to the capital. So now that therefore means that we will need to know the value of the investment, or the amount that was withdrawn at the end of 3 years, meaning at the end of these 3 compounding years of the interest. So now we definitely have to know how much was there at the end of 3 years before the amount was reinvested with the post office, because we took the money and we invested with the post office at 7% per annum, compounded annually for another 5 years. So now we first need to know how much is the future value. Please don't forget in your financial calculator to clear before you do any calculations. When I say you clear, you say second function alpha 00 to clear the memory. If you don't do that, you are likely to get incorrect answers, because the calculator keeps the memory of what we have done whenever you use the functions. But if you just use normal numbers, there's no need for the clearance of the calculator in terms of the memory of the calculator. This calculator has a very good memory. Now we say plus minus 8,500, we press PV. In other words, we are saying plus minus 8.5 is the present value. Then we say 3 times by 1, which is 3 years, times by once a year compounding, meaning the annual compounding, which is once a year. We say 3 times 1, we press N, then it will say 3 times 1, arrow N at the bottom, 3. Then after we say 5, which is interest, divide by M. Remember, M is the frequency of annual compounds or yearly compounds. Then we say 5 divided by 1, and we're compounding the interest once a year. So 5 divided by 1, we press I/Y, which is interest. Then after we say comp, because we are required or we need to compute or calculate the value of the investment after 3 years, just before we make the withdrawal. Then we say comp future value. The future value is 9,839 rand, which is 81 cents. So now this is the value of the investment at the end of 3 years from the first investment, where the amount was invested for 3 years at the rate of 5% per annum, compounded annually. So now this amount was withdrawn and it was invested in the first investment, in the second investment, which was the post office at 7% per annum compounded annually for a further 5 years. That means we initially had an investment. Just want to draw the timeline. We had a present value at the beginning, and the present value was 8,500. And the interest that was earned was for year 1, year 2, and for year 3. So meaning it was year 1, year 2, and year 3. And we earned interest of 5%, interest of 5%, and interest of 5%. And at the end of this, remember, we earn interest, it will be added there, and the interest will be added to the opening balance, and the interest will be added to the opening balance, if you remember example 3.1. So now at the end of 3 years, this is the amount that is in the account, which is the future value at the end of the investment period. The amount that is in the account is 9,839 Rand 81 cents. That is what is in the account at the end of 3 years. Now we take this money, we withdraw, and we have it as cash in our disposal. Then we go now with another company or with another investment opportunity, which is now the post office. We are investing it in the post office, and the post office we will have an opening balance. Now the opening balance being the present value, meaning under the post office now we are going to have the present value, which was the future value of the previous investment, because it was future value for 3 years, but this becomes the present value. Meaning now with the post office, our present value becomes 9,839 Rand 81 cents, because that is the amount that we are initially investing in the post office. So now that will be for year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That means we'll be earning interest of 7%, interest of 7% every year, interest of 7% every year, and interest of 7% every year, and interest of 7% every year. So now we need to say the future value of the previous investment, and at the end of 3 years becomes the present value of the new investment. Therefore now this will accumulate interest in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. Then we need to know how much is the future value of this second investment. After it was future of the previous, present of the current, then future of the current again. So now we'll be able to say future value minus the amount we initially invested, which is 8,500. This will tell us how much did we earn in terms of the interest in this entire investment. Now let us check now all these details that I've highlighted already for you. If how then now do we apply when we use our financial calculator? But I want to highlight the fact that we have two kinds of investments. An amount is earned in the first investment for a certain period, then now it goes to the second investment. I just clear that plus minus 8.5, which is our present value, and our 3 times by 1, this is our n, and our 5 over 1 is our I divided by y, and we computed the future value of the investment, which gave us 9,839 Rand 81 cents. Now we said this amount of the investment now become the present value when this is invested with the post office compounded annually for the further 5 years. Then it says calculate the interest earned over the period of the investment. So now we say plus minus, this is the present value. Remember, present value must be plus or minus whenever you're calculating any of the other unknowns, unless there is a future value. So we are plus minus 9,839 Rand 81 cents, and this is the present value, the amount we presently investing in the post office. Then after we have an interest of 7%, 7, we say 7 over 1. Remember, it's compounded once a year, meaning annually. If it was compounded twice a year, that would be divided by 2. If it was compounded 4 times a year, that would be divided by 4. So now our interest is I divided by y in the button of our calculator, and our n, we know that our n is 5 years times by the number of compound in a year, or number of annual compounds or yearly compound, and it's compounded once. Interest is compounded once a year or annually, then we multiply by 1, that becomes our n. Then after we say compute future value, we want to know how much will be in the account at the end of 5 years, because the amount was withdrawn and invested for a further 5 years. So now don't forget second function alpha 00 to clear your calculator. Second function alpha 00 to clear your calculator. Then after we say plus minus 9839.81, you press PV. Then you say 7 divided by 1, you press I divide by y, which is interest. Then you say 5 times 1 is n, then you press n. You say comp, which is compute or calculate future value. The future value is 13,800.84. So this is 13,884 rand. What are we required to calculate? We require to calculate the interest earned over the period of the investment. So now, which therefore means that we need to say the interest that was earned over the period of the investment, it will be the future value of 13,800.84 minus the amount that was invested. And the amount that we initially invested, which was our money, was 8,500. So the difference between the amount we had and the amount we have earned, or the future value interest on, will be the interest. 13,800.84 minus 8,500. This will give us an interest of 5,300.84 cents. So now this will be the interest earned over the period of this investment. Now this is how we deal with the functions of the calculator. Remember, there was a formula that we were given previously, and the formula that we were given previously was very easy. It made our lives very easy. We knew the formula said sum accumulated will be equal to 8,500 is to 1 plus 0.0545% divided by 1 to the power of 3 times by 1. And if you do this, you get exactly the same amount as 9,839.81. This is easy without using the functions of the calculator, so that whenever you write exam, you must choose which one will be easier for you, so that you make sure that you capitalize on time and grab marks as much as you can, so that time does not become a limiting factor, limiting you not to get 100% in this so easy subject. And again, in the second scenario, we could have said sum accumulated equals 9,839 rand.81 cents, open brackets 1 plus 0.07 divided by 1, which is compounded once a year, to the power of 5 times by 1. Now again, if you do that, you get to the same 13,800 rand and 84 cents. And the difference between the 13.8.84 and the 8.5 that we initially invested will give us the interest that is earned over the period of the investment. Please remember how to put that in your calculator. For you to do that, you say in your calculator 8,500, open brackets 1 plus 0.07 divided by 1. And I want to highlight the fact that when you do your workings in a calculator, your interest must be in decimal. Your interest must be in decimal, and your interest must be in decimal. But whenever you do the workings in a calculator, your interest must be a whole number, 5% over compound, the number of compound in a year, and 7%, which is the number of compound in a year. That is our interest. This is our interest. So make sure that you master that. If you opt for the formula, your interest is in decimal. If you opt for the functions of the calculator, your interest is the whole number, then don't forget to divide by the number of compound in the period of a year. With that, guys, thank you very much. In the next recording, I will be doing activity or example 3.3, which you already can see. And I think you can take the opportunity to be doing 3.3, which you can see that it's a very easy exercise or example where you are required to calculate the future value. But the difference is the fact that now they say what is the final amount. Remember, the final amount is the future value. Same applies. This is the future value and this is the future value. But your interest is compounded biannually, meaning 2 times a year, 2 times a year, or twice a year, however you call it. With that, guys, you've been lovely audience. Thank you very much. God be with you. Stay well and stay safe.